She whispered "Papa," and he kicked her so hard she couldn't breathe. There wasn't a pause, no look of confusion or guilt in his eyes, just the crunch of his boot against her ribs and the sound of her body hitting the barn floor like a sack of grain someone got tired of carrying. Mary's hands scrambled for anything, a bale, a post, dirt, but her legs didn't follow. They hadn't in years. He staggered back, muttering something cruel under his breath, but it wasn't the words that made the tears burn in her eyes. It was the way he looked at her, like she was filth, like she was wrong for even existing. "Don't you ever call me that again," Hank growled. The air in the barn hung heavy with dust and rejection. Mary didn't try to speak again. She just curled around the aching spot in her side and wished, for the 1,000th time, that someone else had found her that night by the river, that it hadn't been Hank, whiskey-wet and hollow inside. She'd been 10 when the accident happened, a wagon overturning on a muddy trail, screams, fire, and then silence. She'd woken up beside the bodies of her parents and hadn't felt her legs since. Someone had lifted her out of the wreckage. Someone had handed her to Hank at the town's edge like she was an unwanted parcel. He'd agreed to take her in exchange for free labor once she got strong enough. She never did. But she worked, as much as she could from the ground. She cleaned with rags between her teeth when her hands were too raw to hold a brush. She rolled herself through the house on makeshift wheels fashioned from a broken chair. She never complained, never asked for more than food and warmth. She never even called him Papa until that night, when she'd been so tired, so hopeful, that the word just slipped out. It cost her everything. That night she lay awake on the floor of the barn, shivering, with only a horse blanket draped over her chest. She didn't cry anymore. Not because she wasn't hurt, she was, but because crying had become a luxury, one she no longer allowed herself. Instead, she stared at the rafters and tried to remember the feel of her mother's hands, her father's laugh, the sound of her name being spoken with love. She drifted into sleep just before dawn, her body sore and cold. The next morning, Hank didn't say a word to her, just tossed a biscuit near her feet and walked off like she was a stray dog. She didn't eat, couldn't. Her side ached too bad and her appetite had disappeared along with her hope. It was near sunset when she heard the sound of hooves and boots crunching on the dirt path outside. Her heart sank at first, maybe someone new for Hank to lie to. He always played the saint when folks rode up, spinning stories of how he saved the little cripple from the woods and gave her a home. But then she heard a voice, a different kind of voice. Deep, calm, measured. "I gotta report someone, been keepin' a paralyzed girl in his barn like livestock." Mary froze, her ears strained. Hank laughed. "Ain't no such thing. That's just nonsense the town likes to throw around. I got a girl under my care, sure, but she's fed, got a bed." "A bed," the man interrupted. There was a pause. "You mind if I see where she sleeps?" Hank hesitated. Mary wanted to scream, to cry out and say please, please come in, but her lips didn't move. Her body had been trained too well to stay quiet, to hide when company came. Then boots scraped against wood. The barn door creaked open. She didn't know what she expected, but it wasn't him. Tall, dust-covered, a badge on his chest. His eyes scanned the barn like a man who'd seen worse but still cared. And when he spotted her, lying small and still on the floor in the corner, something shifted in his face. "What's your name?" he asked. Mary blinked. Her mouth parted but no sound came. "Don't talk to her," Hank said, stepping in behind him. "She's slow, ain't right in the head." The man didn't even turn. "She can speak for herself." "I said she's dumb," Hank repeated louder this time. That's when it happened. The man turned slowly, deliberately, and looked Hank dead in the eye. You lay a hand on her again, and I'll make sure you don't walk straight for a month. It wasn't shouted, it didn't have to be. The barn went still. Even the horses stopped shifting in their stalls. Hank swallowed. The man stepped closer to Mary, knelt. What's your name, sweetheart? Her throat tightened. The truth came out in a whisper. Mary. He nodded. You hurt anywhere? She glanced at her side. Ribs. He touched his hat. I'm Sheriff Granger. I'm talking you with me. Her eyes widened. You can't. Yes, he said softly, I can. Hank's voice boomed behind them. You don't have that kind of power. Granger stood, pulled a paper from his coat. Signed by the judge. Town's been watching. Heard too many stories. You've had your last chance. Mary didn't understand any of it. She only knew that someone, finally, was looking at her like she mattered. By nightfall, she was in a wagon headed up the pass, wrapped in a warm coat that wasn't hers. Sheriff Granger drove without talking much, but every time she looked up, she saw him glance back to make sure she was still covered, still all right. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't care. Anything was better than where she'd been. But when the wheels crunched to a stop outside a small, well-built cabin tucked between pine trees, her heart clenched. It was beautiful, clean, quiet, safe. Granger carried her inside like she weighed nothing, placed her gently on a bed near the fire. This is yours now, he said. She looked around, dazed. For how long? His face didn't change. As long as you want. That night she couldn't sleep, not from fear but from disbelief. He gave her soup, water, a real blanket. He didn't touch her, didn't question her, just said good night and stepped into the other room. In the darkness, Mary stared at the beams above and whispered the only word she had left. Why? And from the other room came a voice, low and steady. Because I lost someone once, and I promised if I ever saw that kind of pain again, I'd stop it. Mary turned her face into the pillow and let herself cry. For the first time in years, it felt like someone heard her. The first week in the sheriff's cabin passed like a dream Mary was scared to wake from. Her body was sore, yes, ribs bruised from Hank's boot, fingers chafed from scrubbing floors, shoulders stiff from years of crawling instead of walking. But it was the quiet that undid her most. Not the kind that meant loneliness, but the kind that meant peace. The kind she'd never known. Granger didn't ask many questions at first. He brought her food at dawn and again at dusk. He helped her wash without shame or pity, always giving her a towel to shield her modesty. And when she asked if he wanted her to do chores to earn her keep, he just shook his head. You rest, heal first. There'll be time for the rest. She wasn't used to that kind of answer. Every place she'd ever been, every person, had made it clear she had to earn her right to exist. Now here was a man who handed her a spoon and said nothing when she dropped it from her shaking grip, who built a ramp on the cabin porch by nightfall without telling her, who carved a smooth wooden rail into the floorboards so she could slide herself from room to room easier. And yet with each kindness Mary flinched more. She kept waiting for the change, for the shift, for the coldness to creep in like it always had. Even kindness was dangerous, she'd learned. Kindness was the mask men wore before they demanded something in return. One night, she couldn't take the wondering anymore. He was seated by the fire, sharpening a small blade. She wheeled herself to the edge of the rug and asked, "Why'd you really bring me here?" Granger paused but didn't look up. Told you already, I made a promise. That's not what I mean. He rested the blade on his knee. His face was weathered, the kind you couldn't read easy. She'd spent years learning how to read men, when they were lying, when they were about to explode, when to duck, when to run. But with Granger there was no storm behind the eyes, only silence, stillness. I ain't got children, he said after a long moment. Never could. Her heart stilled. My wife, she passed some years back. We tried, and when we couldn't, we tried to foster. But the circuit judges didn't trust a lawman with no wife to raise kids. Said a man alone in the woods made 'em uneasy. He smiled without joy. So I stopped asking. He looked up at her then. Till I heard about you. Mary swallowed. I didn't bring you here to fill a hole, he said quietly. And I didn't bring you here to pay off some debt. I brought you here because someone needed to stop what was happening to you. That's all. She believed him. It terrified her. People like him didn't exist. Not in her world. Yet here he was, skin leathery from sun and saddle, eyes too kind for the pain they held, treating her like a person when everyone else had treated her like a burden. Or worse. Okay, she whispered. She wheeled back to her room and wept into the pillow again. She'd lived years on edge, and now she didn't know how to be still. In the weeks that followed, Granger taught her small things. How to chop vegetables with one hand steadying the board. How to load wood into the stove without burning her fingers. He crafted a small cart she could pull behind her wheels with a rope so she could carry books, dishes, or the occasional scrap for the fire. He even taught her to shoot. The first time she held the revolver, her hands trembled so bad she couldn't lift it. Granger didn't mock her. He simply held out his hands and waited. She placed it back in his palms and said, I'm not strong enough. He said, not yet. So they tried again, and again. Each time her grip steadier, her breath calmer. He never rushed her, never barked, never raised his voice. That was the strangest thing of all, his voice never climbed. It wasn't flat or cold. It was calm, like a river that never rushed but always moved. One night she asked about the scar on his cheek, a long pale slash that curled near his jaw. Gunfight, he said, 4 years back. She tilted her head. You get the man who did it. He looked at the fire. No, but I got the one who sent him. She didn't ask more. By the end of that month, the bruises on her ribs had faded. The soreness in her arms had lessened, and the nightmares, though still there, came less often. But then one morning came, and everything shifted again. Granger had gone into town for supplies, leaving her alone for the first time since she'd arrived. He promised to be back before dark. Mary told herself she was fine. She had food, water, a book by her side. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the cabin door. She froze. No one was expected. No one even knew where she was except Hank, she whispered. The door creaked. She backed away from the parlor, rolled herself down the hall, heart pounding like a drum. Sheriff, a voice called. Not Hank's, but something worse. It was Miss Lorna from the general store. Sheriff, are you in? I brought those goods he asked for. Mary stayed hidden, breath shallow, sweat beading on her forehead. The door creaked further. A shadow moved into the cabin. Lorna's boots clacked softly over the boards. Mary debated calling out, but something in her gut told her to wait. And then she heard it. Another voice. Male, rough. Check the bedroom. If she's in there, don't let her scream. Mary's blood turned to ice. She didn't know who he was, But he wasn't the sheriff, and neither was Lorna, not anymore. The second man stepped inside with heavier boots, a muffled cough. She wheeled herself into the pantry as quick as she could and shut the door behind her. Total dark. Her hands found a knife on the shelf. It was dull, meant for bread, but she gripped it like steel. They moved through the house slow, opening drawers, whispering curses under their breath. Judge said he wants her back quiet. Don't bruise her up. Why does he want her anyway? Don't ask, just do it. She pressed her hand to her mouth. The judge, the same one who signed her release, the one who was supposed to help. And now he was sending people to take her back. She didn't understand, not fully, but it didn't matter. All she knew was this: she wasn't going back. The door creaked open. Light spilled into the pantry. "Gotcha!" she screamed. The blade in her hand slashed upward. It grazed skin. A curse exploded above her. She launched the knife again and this time felt it strike something soft. He howled. "Little brat!" She wheeled backward out of the pantry and into the hallway. The man stumbled after her, hand to his shoulder. Behind him, Lorna grabbed at something on the counter, her bag. Probably had a weapon inside. Mary didn't think. She rolled herself into the back room and slammed the door, locked it, then grabbed the shotgun Granger kept on the wall hooks above the dresser. She'd never fired it, but her hands didn't shake this time. The door rattled, then a bang. She didn't flinch. Footsteps. Another bang. "Don't make this hard," the man shouted. She raised the shotgun and pointed it straight at the door. "I will," she said. Then mercifully, the front door slammed open again. "Don't move." Granger's voice. Everything exploded at once. Gunshots, screams, furniture overturned, glass shattered. Mary screamed again, even as she held the shotgun close, praying it wouldn't misfire in her arms. Then silence. A moment passed. Another. Granger opened the door, face cut, sleeve torn, but alive. "They're gone," he said. Mary stared at him, chest heaving. "They wanted to take me." "I know. They said the judge sent them." He nodded slowly. "Then the judge is done for." She blinked, but I should have seen it. He'd been asking questions lately. Said you were better off in town, that I wasn't fit to care for you. She stared at the shotgun in her lap. I was ready to shoot. He walked over, gently took it from her hands. "I know, and you would have." He didn't say more, just pulled her into a hug, careful with her ribs. And for the first time, she didn't flinch away. That night, Granger built a second lock on the door, slept in the armchair by the fire with his gun on his lap, and in the morning he told her everything. About how the judge had been part of a circuit that used children as labor for private landowners, how he covered it up by pretending to place them with guardians, how Hank had been one of many, how Mary wasn't the first, and maybe not the last. "But I'll make sure you're the last," he said. "You have my word." Mary believed him. The town of Dry Creek changed after the ambush. Not in ways the folks could name, not right away, but in the air. In the way windows were shuttered tighter at dusk. In the way eyes drifted longer on strangers. Rumors swirled like dust devils, that the sheriff had gunned down 2 townsfolk without warning, that Miss Lorna had been helping the judge with some secret scheme, that Mary, the crippled orphan girl, was cursed or dangerous or something worse. Granger didn't speak on it. He posted a brief notice on the town board: "Attack on my home, offenders subdued, No further comment, and left it at that. But the men who'd come for Mary hadn't acted alone. Granger knew that, so did Mary. He spent days after the shooting riding out to neighboring counties, digging through court records and testimony. Each night, he returned with tighter jawlines, more lines around his eyes. Mary kept the fire lit for him, left stew on the stove, tried to do her part without getting in the way. She was stronger now. Her arms no longer trembled when she dressed herself. She could pull herself from chair to bed and back again without flinching. And though the fear still flickered at her edges, it was different now. Not the paralyzing fear of being hurt again, but the sharp awareness that she had something worth protecting. Each night she pressed him for more. And finally, one night, Granger unrolled a sheet of parchment on the table and showed her what he'd found. 8 names, 8 judges across the territory, all connected to the same circuit court, all with records of orphan placements that had never been followed up. Some children disappeared within months. Others, like Mary, turned up in homes far from where they'd been assigned, with no checks, no letters, no returns. "This ain't just about Hank," Granger said. "Ain't even just about Judge Holcomb, it's a network. They sold kids like cattle." Mary felt her breath stop. "And the law can't reach them." Granger shook his head. "They are the law. I bring this to the marshal's office. It'll disappear before it's read." She watched the firelight flicker against the map. "Then what do we do?" He looked up and she saw something shift in his face. It wasn't rage. It was something quieter, more final. "We expose it, all of it, loudly, so the people speak before the judges can silence M." Mary thought of the townspeople who had watched her crawl on twisted limbs for years and said nothing, who had let her starve, who looked away when Hank dragged her by the arm down Main Street. "They don't care," she whispered. "Not yet," he said, "but they will." Granger began writing letters, to newspapers, to traveling preachers, to missionaries and school teachers and anyone with a pen and spine. He had names, stories, records. He gathered testimonies from other orphans who'd slipped free of the circuit, sent riders to distant counties to track those still living. It was dangerous work. Twice he was followed. Once a man tried to burn his barn, but each time he kept going. And Mary, too, found herself changing. One morning she wheeled herself to the mirror and stared long at the girl she saw there, pale from years indoors, thin as fence rail, but not broken. Her hands were strong now, calloused, her shoulders held square, her back once hunched with fear sat taller. "I want to help," she told him that night. "You already do," he said. "No," she pressed. "I want to tell my story, all of it." Granger hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded. "They need to know what it felt like, or they won't care." So she wrote, with cramped fingers and trembling pen. She wrote about the beatings, the hunger, the crawling. She wrote about the night she called Hank Papa and he spat in her face. She wrote about the other children who came and went, how most never lasted more than a month before Hank traded them away, claimed they'd run off. She wrote about the morning she tried to run and couldn't make it past the road before collapsing, how he'd laughed, told her even the dogs wouldn't want her. Granger read it with tears in his eyes. "It's time," he said. He rode to the next township to deliver her letter to the Kansas Gazette, said they wouldn't print all of it, but enough to light the fire. He was gone 3 days. And on the 4th, Mary's world cracked again. It began with a horse galloping through town. Riderless. Granger S. Mary saw it from the window. She wheeled herself outside, heart racing. The townsfolk gathered, murmuring. No one knew what had happened. No one had seen him, but his saddlebag was torn, blood on the leather, one stirrup gone. Mary didn't hesitate. She rolled to the sheriff's barn, strapped herself into the rig he'd made for her, one that let her brace herself behind a horse and guide it with reins from a low wooden cart. He hadn't let her use it alone before, but she was done waiting. The trail was faint, but the horse had come from the West Hills. She followed the tracks till they vanished in pine needles, then found drag marks, boots scuffed in the dirt, blood drops beside them. Then silence. She called his name. No answer. Then she found the clearing. And the coat. Granger's coat, bloodied and torn, hanging from a tree like a warning. But no body. Mary's breath stilled. Then she saw the boot prints, 4 men dragging someone westward. She turned her horse and followed. The trail led deep into old mining land, hills riddled with collapsed shafts and outlaw dens. She pressed on, every bump jarring her spine, her arms shaking from the effort, but she didn't stop. At dusk she saw the cabin. A small one, crude, smoke from the chimney. She crawled out of the rig, belly to ground, pulled herself through the brush till she could see through the window. Granger tied to a chair, bruised, barely conscious. 2 men stood over him. Judge wants him alive till he signs, one said. What if he do? The other shrugged, then he won't live long. Mary slid back into the brush. Her mind raced. She had no weapon, no plan, no time. So she made a decision. She doubled back to town. The ride took hours. Her body screamed. But by dawn she burst into Dry Creek Square, her hair wild, arms streaked in sap and mud. She shouted for help. People turned. She told them everything. How Granger had uncovered a ring of child trafficking judges, how he'd written to the press, how he'd been taken, how 2 of the attackers had tried to drag her back weeks ago, and no one in town had said a word. Do you know what he did for me? She shouted, wheeling herself to the steps of the courthouse. He gave me back my life, and now he might die for it. For a long, terrible moment, no one spoke. Then old Miss Reedy stepped forward, the schoolmarm. I remember a boy went missing after Judge Holcomb placed him with a family near Tallow Creek, she said. They said he'd run away, but he was always a sweet boy, never caused trouble. Then came the blacksmith. Judge had me build shackles for a man who owned no prisoners. Then the preacher. He once told me not to ask questions about where the orphan tithe was going. One by one the town spoke. And by noon, 30 people rode west behind Mary, rifles in hand. They reached the cabin at sundown. The first man out the door didn't get 10 feet before he was dropped. The second tried to run and was tackled by the blacksmith himself. Mary wheeled herself inside. Granger was barely breathing. But he was alive. She cut the ropes with her teeth. He looked at her with one swollen eye and whispered, "Told you were strong." Then passed out. They brought him home. It took weeks for him to walk again. But by the time the newspaper ran Mary's letter, it wasn't just Dry Creek who read it. It was St. Louis, Denver, Chicago. Within months, the judge had been stripped of his seat. The circuit disbanded. New laws passed for orphan placements, and every surviving child from the circuit was offered a home. Mary testified before the state committee, wheeled into a courtroom full of men in coats and pocket watches, and told them exactly what happened. When she finished, there was silence. Then one man stood and clapped. The others followed. That night, Granger handed her a deed to the house with her name on it. "You earned it," he said. She shook her head, eyes full. "No," she said, "we earned it." And outside, the wind howled over Dry Creek, but inside that little cabin, a new life had already begun. Granger's recovery was long, the kind of slow, agonizing climb that made a man question every movement. His ribs had been cracked, one lung collapsed, and his leg, already troubled from an old war wound, had been twisted in the scuffle. Mary never left his side. She fed him when his hands shook too much, cleaned the wounds that bled through the bandages, read him newspaper clippings from distant cities reporting the unraveling of the judge's circuit. But the world didn't stop to let them heal. The arrests spread like brushfire. Town after town unearthed similar scandals: orphans reassigned by backroom handshakes, children adopted by men with no background, no questions asked. For each orphan that survived to tell their story, two had vanished. Some counties tried to hide it, others tried to silence the survivors. But Mary and Granger were too loud now. Too many eyes were watching. And while the nation began reckoning with what it had ignored, Dry Creek stood taller than it ever had before. What had once been a quiet, dusty town people passed through on their way somewhere else was now a place where men and women came to testify, to organize, to find protection. Granger's home became a refuge. Some called it the shelter on the ridge. Others simply called it Mary's house. Because Mary, crippled, discarded, nearly erased Mary, had become the voice of it all. She was no longer just the girl with the twisted legs. She was the face of the movement. Every week letters came addressed to her. From children, from women, from lawyers, from journalists wanting to know how she'd survived. What made her different? Some came with stories of their own. Others came simply to thank her. And with every word she read, Mary grew stronger. But not everyone was grateful. One night, as frost rimmed the windows and the wind scraped low across the hills, Mary was returning from the schoolhouse, where she'd begun helping Miss Reedy teach reading to the younger children, when she saw the lantern flicker ahead. Someone was waiting on the porch. A man, tall, wrapped in a long gray duster, his hat low. She slowed her cart, gripping the small pistol Granger had taught her to use, now tucked beneath a false panel in the side. The man didn't move. "Can I help you?" she called. His voice came quiet, smooth, too rehearsed. "Just passing through. Heard the sheriff lives up this way." "He does," she said. "He's asleep." "That right, shame. Got business with him." Mary didn't blink. "Come back tomorrow." A pause. "Then you marry?" She didn't answer. He stepped forward. "I knew Judge Holcomb, knew him real well. He used to brag about you, said you were his biggest mistake." Mary slowly unlatched the pistol from its holster. "He's dead now," she said, "and the rest are falling." The man smiled. "Not all of us. Some of us were still making good money." Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the dark. Mary didn't sleep that night. Nor did Granger. They knew it wouldn't end with just a few judges getting tossed from their benches. The circuit had made a lot of men rich, and many of them weren't ready to let go. And soon enough, the retaliation began. The first was a fire at the mission school in Coyote Ridge. No one hurt, but everything inside lost. Then came the poisoning of a water barrel at a similar shelter in Missouri. A child died. Then a newspaperman was found beaten half to death outside his printing office in Kansas City. Each attack was quiet, but all had the same message: stop digging. Mary didn't stop. She organized riders to escort children between safe houses. She recruited ranch wives and old nuns to start proper orphan registries. She raised money through speaking letters and rallies, even wrote to a senator's wife who, to everyone's shock, replied with a donation large enough to build a schoolhouse just for children of the circuit. Still, the danger grew. One morning, Granger found a letter nailed to the door. "Next time it's not just a warning. You speak again and the girl dies." They burned it, but the message lingered. Granger wanted to send Mary away, to St. Louis maybe, or even up north to live with his sister in Wisconsin, somewhere safe, but she refused. "I won't hide," she said, "not ever again." He didn't argue, but he started sleeping with a shotgun at the foot of the bed. Then came word from Gallows Bend, a town east, near the border, where a boy named Jasper had escaped a ranch run by a man called Byron Tethridge. Said Tethridge had been buying children for years under forged papers, working them like slaves, and disposing of them when they slowed. It was worse than anything Mary had heard yet. She and Granger rode out together to find Jasper. He was only 9, skinny, eyes too old for his face, but he told them everything. Tethridge had a ledger, names, prices, destinations. "We get that ledger," Granger said. "We burn the whole system down." But getting it meant going into Tethridge's ranch, heavily guarded, isolated, and known to be crawling with hired men who wouldn't flinch at shooting a lawman, much less a girl. Mary didn't hesitate. They planned for weeks. Mary would create a distraction at the edge of the property while Granger snuck through the back gate and found the ledger. Simple, quiet. But nothing in their lives had ever gone to plan. The night they chose was clear, too clear, sound carried. Granger had just made it to the back shed when a guard stumbled on Mary, her rig stuck in a patch of loose mud, the wheels grinding without purchase. She shot him, quick, right in the shoulder, but the noise exploded through the trees. Within seconds, men poured out. Granger burst from the shed with a bundle in his hands, paper, bound in rawhide. They ran. Bullets chased them. One caught Granger in the thigh. He stumbled. Mary turned the rig back, reached him. "Leave me," he shouted. She didn't even answer. Instead, she strapped the leather across her chest, threw his arm around her shoulders, and drove the rig faster than it had ever gone. Somehow they made it. Back to Dry Creek, bloodied, bruised, but alive. And in Mary's arms was everything they needed. The ledger blew the circuit wide open. Names of buyers, names of judges, even receipts for bribes paid to lawmen. It was more than scandal, it was conspiracy. The governor himself came to Dry Creek. He met with Mary, shook her hand, promised justice. For once, Mary believed him. Within months, mass arrests followed. Byron Tethridge was hanged in Gallows Bend. Judge Holcomb's allies were stripped of titles, property seized, and Mary was asked to speak before the entire territorial council. She wore a dress sewn by the widow who once wouldn't speak to her. She rode in a carriage sent by the same town that once let her beg scraps in the mud. And when she wheeled herself up to the podium, the room fell silent. She didn't speak with anger. She spoke with truth. About what it meant to be discarded, what it meant to be broken, and what it took to rebuild when no one believed in you. She told them about Granger, about the night he found her behind the barn, alone, twisted, and ready to die. About how he didn't pity her. He just picked her up. Some folks say I was saved, she said, but I say I was seen. That's what changes things, seeing each other. They gave her a standing ovation. Later that night in the hotel room, first she'd ever stayed in, she sat by the window with Granger, watching the city lights. "Do you miss the quiet?" she asked. He chuckled, "Not sure I ever had it." She nodded, then said soft, "I think I'd like to start a school, a real one for kids like me." "You will," he said, "you already have." And she smiled because for once, the future didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a door, and she was ready to open it. The snow arrived early that winter, blanketing the hills around Dry Creek in a quiet that felt sacred, like the land itself was pausing to breathe. Mary spent her mornings by the window, pencil in hand, sketching plans for the school she wanted to build. Granger, Kane now a permanent companion, took to carving toys for the children who wandered up the ridge every week, runaways, half-hungry, frostbitten. The house had become more than a shelter. It was a promise, a place where the world didn't turn away. But peace has a way of making you forget the shadows still moving just beyond the firelight. It started with a telegram, short, clipped. "Harrison escaped, headed west, possibly toward you." Granger read it 3 times before saying a word. Then he folded it and slid it into the fire. Mary didn't ask who Harrison was, but the look on Granger's face, tight, unreadable, told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just another corrupt official. This was someone personal. That night Granger locked the windows. By the end of the week, he was sleeping with a rifle again. Mary tried not to let fear creep back in. She focused on the children. She wrote to donors. She reviewed land deeds for the school, arranged to purchase a patch just south of town, flat and dry, good for building. She didn't want the past dictating her days anymore. But it wasn't the past coming for her. It was something unfinished. A week later, a rider came up the hill. A girl, maybe 12, torn coat, one shoe missing. She collapsed right on the porch. Granger scooped her up and carried her inside, and it was Mary who nursed her, washing dirt from her face, feeding her broth, calming the shaking in her fingers. The girl's name was Lisbeth, and she wasn't running from nothing. She was running from Harrison. "He has a house," she whispered one night, curled on a cot near the hearth. "In the woods, not far from here. He keeps girls locked, like cages. I escaped 'cause I was small." Mary felt cold all over. "Why were you there?" "My uncle sold me." Granger's jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. Mary reached for the girl's hand. "We're gonna fix this. We're gonna fix all of it." But Lisbeth wasn't done. "He knows you," she whispered, eyes flicking to Mary. "Said he wants to finish what Judge Holcomb couldn't." Mary didn't sleep after that. And neither did Granger. They knew waiting wasn't an option. This wasn't just about Harrison anymore. It was about every child who might still be caged in that forest, waiting for someone to see them. So they gathered what they had. Granger went into town, met with the new marshal, a man named Kendrick who'd been brought in after the old sheriff was fired for turning a blind eye. Kendrick was young, maybe too young, but his eyes were steady and he listened. Still, he hesitated. "Harrison's protected," he said, voice low. "Friends in the state capitol, tread careful." Granger didn't bother with pleasantries. "You come or you don't, but I'm going." In the end, Kendrick agreed, quietly. He swore in 3 deputies from nearby towns, all men who'd seen what Mary had built, all men who'd decided they couldn't look away anymore. They rode out the next morning. Mary wasn't supposed to go. She promised Granger she'd stay behind, keep the children safe. But promises made to soothe fear rarely hold. She waited until the sun crested the ridge. Then she loaded her rig, packed what she could, and followed their tracks. It was nearly dusk when she found them. Camped near the edge of a ravine, scoping a structure hidden by trees and distance. Kendrick was hunched over a map, pointing out the escape routes. Granger didn't look surprised to see her, just tired. "I told you not to come," he said. "I heard you," she said. They didn't argue after that. The plan was simple. Kendrick and the deputies would storm the front. Granger would cover the rear. Mary would wait with the extra horses, ready to help any children who ran. It didn't go simple. Nothing ever did. They moved at dawn. The house was worse than Lisbeth had described. Barred windows, locks thicker than a bank vault, and inside, behind iron doors, 7 girls, young, starving, filthy, but alive. Kendrick's team made it halfway through the house before the first shot rang out. One of the deputies went down. Then came Harrison. He burst from a crawlspace below the house, shooting wild, screaming her name, Mary's name, as if this were some private war between them. Granger tackled him, but Harrison was stronger than he looked. They crashed into the mud, fists flying, blood already streaking across Granger's cheek. Mary didn't think. She aimed. Fired. The bullet caught Harrison in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He hit the ground with a groan, reaching for a knife strapped to his boot. But Granger was faster. The rifle butt cracked against Harrison's skull, once, twice. He didn't move after that. They took the girls, all 7. Lisbeth ran to them, crying. Kendrick wired for reinforcements. Harrison was arrested, barely alive, barely breathing. And just like that, the last monster fell. But the victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like silence. The kind of silence that comes after too much pain. Mary rode back to Dry Creek with Granger beside her, neither speaking. There was nothing left to say. They'd done it. They ended it. But the cost of survival still weighed on them both. Spring came late. The land thawed slowly, like it too was learning how to heal. Construction on the school began mid-March. Volunteers poured in, bricklayers, carpenters, even a glassblower from Carson City who insisted on donating the windows. Mary named it the House of the Scene. No plaque, no monument, just a place where no child would be invisible again. And still Mary kept writing. She told stories, not just of what happened, but of what came after, of girls who learned to read, of boys who planted gardens, of the way Granger, with all his old wounds, still laughed when the children played too loud. One morning, a man from the state arrived with a badge and a sealed letter. Mary opened it slowly. Inside was an offer. The governor wanted her to lead the new child protection office being built in the territory capital. Full salary, staff, power to investigate any facility, any orphanage, any adoption. It was everything she'd fought for. She stared at it for a long time, then passed it to Granger. "What should I do?" He didn't answer right away. Just said, "What do you want?" She looked out the window. At the school still rising from the soil. At Lisbeth helping hammer fence posts. At the mountain shadows curling gently along the ridge. "I want to stay," she said. And so she did. The Capitol got its office. A good woman ran it. and Mary stayed in Dry Creek where she was needed most. The years passed, but the visitors never stopped. Some came just to shake her hand, some to drop off donations, some to ask for help, others simply came to see if the stories were true. They were. All of them. And more. Because Mary wasn't a legend. She was just a girl who'd once been kicked in the mud, left for dead, told she was worthless. But she'd risen. She'd loved. She'd fought. And she'd won. The valley swelled green with the return of summer, and laughter ran through the schoolyard like a hymn. Chickens clucked near the barn, chalk dust swirled through open windows, and children chased shadows on sun-warmed planks. Mary sat beneath the wide oak out front, a ledger open on her lap, but her eyes weren't on the numbers. They were on Lisbeth and the others playing in the tall grass, ribbons in their hair, cheeks pink from sunlight instead of fear. She hadn't thought it possible to build something so full of life from the ashes of what she came from. Yet here it stood. The house of the scene, 2 stories tall, 20 beds, 3 classrooms, a kitchen that always smelled like cornbread, and a back door that never stayed locked. It was home. And yet there was something gnawing again, a heaviness she couldn't name. She felt it in her bones at night as she sat up late watching the stars, wondering what came next and if peace could really last. Sometimes she caught Granger staring off the same way, quiet and withdrawn, like the war in him had never fully ended. She worried about him, more than she said out loud. His limp had worsened since the winter, and his cough was deeper in the mornings. He still chopped wood, still made toys, still fixed everything from broken shutters to splinters in tiny fingers. But when he smiled now, it was thinner, fainter, like he was holding back from something. Mary noticed how he'd begun writing letters when he thought no one was looking. Long ones, folded neatly, sealed with wax, but he never mailed them. He kept them tucked away in a tin box beneath his bed. She asked him once gently, "Are you all right?" He looked at her then, eyes full of all the miles between them. "Just putting things in order." That was all he said. The dread settled in her stomach like cold lead. Then came the envelope. No return address, just a crisp stamp and the school's name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single line. "I know where she came from." No name, no signature. But Mary's hands trembled when she folded the paper. She hadn't spoken of her mother in years. Not since the judge's house. Not since that last night in the cellar when Harrison had told her she was thrown away by a woman who didn't want her. But part of her never fully believed that. And now someone else knew something. She didn't tell Granger. Instead, she went into town alone, asking around, speaking in hushed tones. It was Kendrick, now a fully sworn sheriff, who pointed her to a woman in a mining camp 3 towns over. "Midwife," he said, "old as the mountains, delivered half the babies in these hills before folks had hospitals." Mary packed a satchel and left before sunrise. The ride was long and dry, the road winding through gulches and ridges that whispered of things buried. But Mary didn't turn back, not even when the trail grew thin and the sun burned the backs of her hands. She found the camp by late afternoon, just a cluster of shanties and tents by a creek, with rusted tin roofs and the smell of iron in the air. The midwife was sitting outside her hut, shelling peas into a bowl. She looked up as Mary approached. "You've got your mama's eyes," she said, before Mary could even speak. That stopped her cold. The woman nodded slowly. "Knew you'd come someday." Mary sank onto the stool beside her, throat tight. Who was she? She whispered. The midwife didn't answer at first, just shelled a few more peas, the sound slow and rhythmic. Your mama was 17, sweet girl, hair like night, laughed even when she had nothing. She came to me alone, belly round, eyes full of secrets. Said she was running from a man who promised to marry her but never came back. I delivered you in that hut. You were small, too quiet. I thought you might not make it. Mary stared at the ground, heart hammering. What happened to her? The midwife sighed. After you were born, she kissed your forehead, then she left. Mary's chest tightened. Why? She said it wasn't safe, that the man who'd hurt her would come for you. She left you with a note, said your name was Mary, said she hoped you'd grow up where the world was kinder. Tears welled in Mary's eyes. She gave me away. The woman looked at her gently. She tried to save you. Then from her apron pocket, she pulled out a yellowed envelope, brittle at the corners. I kept this in case you ever came. Mary opened it slowly. Inside was a locket and a note. In faded ink. To my Mary, you are more than what this world will ever understand. Be strong, forgive me. Mary wept then, not because she was abandoned, but because, for the first time in her life, she knew she was loved. The ride back felt different. She felt the weight of the locket against her chest, a quiet pulse reminding her she came from a woman who fought to give her a chance. Granger was on the porch when she returned. He didn't ask where she'd been. He just looked at her face and nodded. You found it, he said. Mary nodded, voice caught in her throat. I did. That night she handed him the locket. He opened it slowly, studied the faded photograph inside. A girl not much older than Mary was now, eyes full of grit. She looks like you. Mary smiled, tired and full. But the peace didn't last. 2 weeks later, Granger collapsed while stacking firewood. Lisbeth screamed. Mary came running, heart in her throat. He was pale, gasping, one hand gripping his chest. Kendrick helped carry him inside. Doc Pearson arrived within the hour, his face grim. It's his heart, he said quietly. Been weakening for years. I reckon it's the bullet fragments still lodged near his lung from the war, too risky to remove. Mary's hands shook as she tucked a blanket around him. Granger looked up at her, his face wan but calm. Don't cry for me, he murmured. I got more life than I ever expected, more than I deserved. Mary couldn't stop crying anyway. That night the children sat on the floor around his bed. He told stories, some funny, some wild, some clearly made up. But they listened wide-eyed until they all fell asleep in a pile of blankets and arms and warmth. Mary sat beside him long after they drifted off. He reached for her hand. You saved them all, he said. No, she whispered, you did. He smiled then, a full smile, the kind that reached all the way to his eyes. Promise me something, he said. Anything. When I go, don't build a statue, don't hang no portrait, just keep that school open, keep seeing them. Mary nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. I promise. He squeezed her hand once, then fell asleep. He never woke up. They buried him beneath the oak tree he'd carved his name into the first week they arrived. No fanfare, just a wooden marker etched with 4 words. He saw us all. The entire town came. Children stood silent in rows. Kendrick gave a prayer. Lisbeth placed the locket Mary had given back to her at the base of the tree. Mary didn't speak, she couldn't. But that night, when the stars burned bright above the ridge, she took out a blank page and began writing again. Not about the pain, but about the legacy. About how a broken man and a forgotten girl built something stronger than violence, deeper than fear, a home. She knew now what came next. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure no one ever had to survive alone again. The schoolhouse doors creaked open at sunrise, and Mary stood at the threshold, hand resting on the frame Granger had carved. The wood was weather-worn now, but his name still ran along the inside beam, small and careful. She touched it every morning, not out of grief but as a promise. 3 months had passed since the funeral, and the seasons had begun turning again. But something had shifted in the air, like the land itself had paused, waiting to see what she would do next. The house of the scene wasn't just a school anymore. It had grown. Mary built a garden in the back, so the children could grow their own vegetables. She added a reading loft to the upstairs, filled with books donated by folks from all over the county. Kendrick arranged a rail line discount so that mail could reach them twice as fast, and donations began trickling in: clothes, tools, blankets, even a piano. But most of all, more children came. A boy from the logging camps, bruised and near mute. A girl whose mother was buried in a grave without a name. Twins who hadn't spoken since the night their father disappeared into the gulch. And each time Mary opened that door and let another child in, she felt Granger's spirit behind her, not haunting, guiding. She became known for her quiet fierceness, her letters to the governor, her long rides through the mountains to fetch forgotten orphans. People stopped calling her that crippled girl who used to beg in town and started calling her Miss Mary with reverence and warmth. But even as the school grew stronger, Mary's heart was tender. She missed him in everything. She still heard Granger's footsteps in the hall sometimes, still caught herself turning to ask him how to fix a squeaky hinge or what color paint to use on the windows. His coat still hung by the door, though the sleeves were beginning to stiffen. One evening, as a storm brewed in the distance, Kendrick arrived holding an oilskin folder, rain dripping from his hat brim. "I think you ought to read this," he said, placing it on the table. Mary opened it slowly. Inside was a will, handwritten and witnessed, dated just weeks before Granger passed. In it he named her as sole heir. But that wasn't what made her hand tremble. It was the letter beneath it, written in his sharp, uneven scrawl. "Mary, if you're reading this, then I've gone ahead of you. Don't waste tears on that. My road's been long, and thanks to you, worth walking. There are things I didn't say out loud. Maybe I should have, but I figured you always saw straight through me anyway. I was angry when I found you, angry at the world, at myself, at God too, if I'm honest. But you cracked something in me. That day you tried to crawl to that outhouse with your broken legs and your pride still intact. I knew you were stronger than anyone I'd ever met. You didn't need saving. You just needed someone to see you. Thank you for letting me be that person. And thank you for giving me something I never thought I'd have, family. Keep building that school, keep seeing them. And when you get tired, 'cause you will, remember you're not alone. You never were. I'll see you on the other side of the ridge. Granger." Mary cried, the letter clutched to her chest, her sobs quiet so the children wouldn't hear. But she wasn't alone for long. Lisbeth appeared in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted by lightning flashing in the distance. "You okay?" she whispered. Mary nodded, wiping her cheeks, just remembering. Lisbeth padded across the floor and climbed into her lap without a word. Together, they watched the rain streak the window, two hearts beating as one. Weeks later, word reached Mary of a girl living in a collapsed barn 2 counties over. 11, paralyzed from a fall, left behind when her family couldn't afford a doctor. Folks said she dragged herself through the dirt to find food, that she didn't speak anymore, that she barely breathed. Mary saddled her mare and left before dawn. The ride was brutal, wind like razors, mud halfway to her knees, wolves howling in the distant ridges. But she didn't stop. When she reached the barn, the smell hit first: mildew, rot, and something worse. Then the sound, a faint whimper like a kitten too weak to cry. She pushed open the sagging door and found the girl beneath a broken trough, arms curled around her belly, hair matted with dust. She was so small, just like Mary had been. She knelt beside her and touched her shoulder gently. "Hey now, it's all right, I see you." The girl flinched. Mary smiled softly. "My name's Mary, I've got a place for you." No response. Mary reached into her coat and pulled out something. Granger's old bandana, sun-bleached and frayed, the one he'd always kept in his back pocket. She wrapped it around the girl's wrist, slow and careful. "Someone gave me a second chance once," she said. "Now it's your turn." It took hours to get the girl onto the saddle. Mary tied her close, talking the whole way, stories about the school, about the garden, about the games the other children played. She didn't know if the girl heard her. But when they crested the hill and the school came into view, red roof glowing in the sunset, smoke rising from the chimney, the girl stirred. Mary looked down. The girl's lips moved, barely audible. "Home." Mary tightened her grip on the reins. "Yes, sweetheart, home." They rode the last mile in silence. The children ran out barefoot, blankets and cocoa in hand. Lisbeth helped carry the girl in. Kendrick, now married and with a child of his own, fixed the porch rail the next morning so the girl could sit out in the sun. Mary built her a special desk in the classroom, low to the ground and carved with birds. The girl didn't speak for weeks, but she drew hundreds of pictures. One morning she left one on Mary's desk. A tree, a schoolhouse, and 2 figures standing hand in hand beneath the sunset. Mary hung it on the wall, right above Granger's name. Years passed. The house of the scene became a beacon in the region. People traveled from towns across the state to learn how they did it, how a girl with no legs and a past full of fire built something unshakable. But Mary never made speeches. She didn't like spotlights. She just kept doing what she did best, welcoming the lost, binding the broken, reminding every child who stepped through that door that they were seen. And when she grew older, white streaking her hair, eyes softer but no less sharp, she still began each morning the same way. She'd walk to the old oak, place her hand on the carving and whisper, "I'm still seeing them, Granger." Then she'd open the door and begin again. There's a story that circulates now, passed down through generations, about the sheriff who couldn't have children and the girl no one wanted, about how they built a family out of ashes, about how love doesn't need blood or wealth or miracles, just the courage to see what others refuse to, and the grace to never stop trying. Years later, long after Mary had passed on peacefully in the very bed Granger built, Children still ran barefoot down the dirt paths of the house of the scene. The oak tree out front had grown enormous, its roots lifting the earth like it was trying to hold the building steady. Beneath it stood a simple statue, Mary in her rocking chair, a child curled up in her lap, both smiling toward the rising sun. Granger's bandana was carved into her hand. Lisbeth, now a woman with silver along her temples, had taken Mary's place. She still wore her shoes a size too big, still drank cocoa with too much cinnamon, and still paused every evening by the porch rail where she'd once first whispered, "Don't leave me." She never did. Not truly. Because Mary's presence filled every room, not as a ghost, but as a thread sewn into the very soul of the place. Children still whispered her name at bedtime, still found old sketches she'd drawn tucked into the bookshelves or stitched into the quilts. Visitors often asked how the house of the scene had survived so many decades without being bought, torn down, or changed. Lisbeth always said the same thing, because someone loved us before we knew how to ask for it. And that kind of love doesn't die. One winter night, a boy with burned scars along his back stood by the statue, fists in his pockets, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. He was new, angry, skittish, convinced no one wanted him. Lisbeth joined him but said nothing. After a long while the boy asked, "Was she real?" Lisbeth nodded, "More than anyone I've ever known." He looked down at the carved child in the statue's lap. "Do you think she'd have seen me?" Lisbeth touched the boy's shoulder. "She already has." The boy didn't answer, but he stayed by the statue until the snow began to fall. Then he followed Lisbeth inside. Back into the light. Back into the warmth. Back into the house where no one was invisible. Where love had once cracked open a hard man's heart and healed a broken girl's bones. Forever.